Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Free Thought Hour. Now, hour is a very pertinent word at the moment because we've just had a disagreement with our clocks, which, it's the time of year, isn't it, when they get switched and nobody knows how to connect with anybody else. It's such a nightmare. I wish they'd stop doing that. Anyway, enough of that nonsense. Tercia is here. Welcome, my co-host, Tercia.
Hello, John, and hello to our audience. Thank you for having me again. No, not as many coughs and sniffles as last week. So
Good.
let's jump right in. I'm very excited about our guest of tonight.
I know. Yes. Well, we have Ariana Jasmine. Here she is. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
We're fine. How the devil are you?
I'm doing good. It's funny you said night when it's like literally sunny out here. It's 1 p.m. So it's funny the time differences. I wish I was in Europe right now. France just seems so cool at the moment. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm Ariana Jasmine. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you as a guest because you're such a high-profile person. Tercia.
No. Thank you.
I think Ariana is our youngest guest since I've been a co-host, at least.
Well, this is possible, excluding the hosts themselves, of course.
I think you guys are both younger than me, honestly. I'm not gonna lie. I think you guys are both younger than me.
We can dream.
Flattery won't get you anywhere. We've already passed that.
Oh man, that's so funny.
Anyway, I haven't actually had a chance to find out very much about you, but I do know that you are present on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch TV. And as far as I've never had much to do with Twitch. In fact, years ago, there was a rival to me. I had a weekly show called Skeptics in the Hub on YouTube, and I had a rival called Skeptics in the Pub Online on Twitch, and that's about as much as I know about it. Seems to be a sort of a YouTube clone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm not too familiar. Wait, are you talking about Twitch?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, Twitch is not a YouTube clone. Twitch is really just a platform where you live stream. It's a live streaming platform, just purely live streaming. It's, from my understanding, it's the biggest live streaming platform yet, but it's the one website that has made live streaming easier than the other websites, and it's more monetizable than other websites. So it's a bit hard to monetize on YouTube and other platforms. On Twitch it's easier. So yeah.
Well, thanks for updating me on that. It's useful to know.
Yeah, of course.
So, but you're also in print, aren't you? You've been published in also Washington Post. Tell me some more.
Yeah, so I am an opinion writer for outlets like Truth Out and Newsweek. Now it really depends on when I have time, because it's just so time consuming to write, and usually the monetary return that you get is minimal, right? So it's a bit harder for me to invest time into writing, but I am a freelance opinion writer for multiple different outlets when I do have the time to do the writing. But then I've also been featured on CNN, Washington Post. I've been featured on NBC, Middle East Eye, just like multiple different news outlets for the work that I've done. So that's also like another side of, I do myself write, but then I also have been featured just as a person as well.
Great. Well, we normally start these interviews by asking our guest to give us a potted history, a brief biog of how you got to be the person you are today. Are you up for that?
Yeah, of course. I think my villain origin story is very interesting. By the way, I told my Discord that we're on, so we might have some of my people come in and out. But hi, Farah. Hi, Adventure. Hi, Violet. Thanks for coming in. Yeah. So I think
I'm so sorry. For our audience sake, I want to say that I was the one who insisted with John that we get you on as a guest,
Mhm.
because you're also very big on TikTok, which I don't understand. I mean, I understand that you're big on TikTok, but I don't understand TikTok because I'm too old. So
Yeah.
I'm in the process of learning how TikTok works. But I heard about you because I'm a keen listener to David Smalley's podcast,
Oh yeah,
and
great
so
guy.
there's two
Yeah.
reasons. I heard about you on David Smalley's podcast, and we also follow on Free Thought Productions. We have a weekly program where we do atheist news, and we've been following the Iranian protests now for since it happened, basically.
Yes.
And when I heard your interview on David Smalley's podcast, I just felt that we had to get you on because we talk about what's happening in Iran on the news. And you are somebody who really knows the inside story. So that's why we've got you as a guest tonight. And now that I've said that, please go ahead and tell us how you came to be the person you are today, because I'm very keen to hear the details.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Maldeep. Of course, yeah. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me. David and I are really good friends. I actually had the pleasure of meeting him and going live in his studio and speaking to him. It was my second time going on his podcast, and he really provided his platform to allow me to speak about Iran. So, David and I are very close. We talk regularly. I'm really glad you listen to his podcast. He does some amazing work as well with dispelling, different religious things that just aren't true, right? Now, as far as it goes for me, I think my villain origin story, I guess, for the lack of better terms, is I my parents immigrated from Iran. Pretty average working class story, My mom was really what kind of started my platform. She came to America, didn't really speak a lot of English at all, had me the first year she was in America, and then she tried to go into the workforce. Her first job was a cashier at a fast food restaurant called Wendy's, and she got paid $7.25 an hour, and that was her first job. But after decades of working and living an honest, life, she worked her way up to being a bank branch manager. And that was when she was originally diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And so she was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And we very, very early on found out that it was going to be a matter of whether she could pay her rent or her chemotherapy. And so she actually moved back to Iran after living in America for 20 years, because out there, healthcare is they have universal healthcare there. I mean, the country has a lot of issues, but they do have universal healthcare. So she went back to Iran in about 2019, came back right before the COVID shutdowns in 2020. We thought she was in remission. She relapsed with stage 4 bone cancer that had metastasized and spread across her body at that point. And so that was when everything just hit the fan. Like, I thought her fighting her cancer was going to be the hardest part, but in reality, the hardest part of her journey with battling cancer was, is she going to have housing? How many times do we have to argue with the insurance to allow her to get a surgery that she needed? There was a time where she was seeing an oncologist, and the oncologist was just so overbooked because he was one of the only oncologists available on state funded insurance, that he completely missed her cancer spreading. And she kept telling him, hey, like, so something's wrong, my hip kind of hurts, and he kept ignoring her because he was so overbooked. And that was really her cancer actually spreading. And
can I interrupt you, because it's very sad, and I can relate to it because my first wife died of ovarian cancer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
When she was only 53. That's a long time ago now.
Yeah, very common.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've got to do something about
doing now, Ariana?
She's good. Actually, she's still fighting. Yeah, she's still fighting cancer. But I kind of like watching her not only fight cancer, but also fight the system as well. Kind of just like one day I was like, I'm done. I quit my job. I was a director. I quit my job and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go into advocacy. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm going to do it. I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it. So I quit my job. And that was when I first started off TikToking. And that was when my platform first grew and I gained visibility. And then I ventured off to Twitch and Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and all these other platforms. But that was my origin story on when I started advocating.
America so needs a national health service.
Listen, I once I'm burned out from advocating, I hope I can move to France or something. America's great. I just don't know if it's for me, but that's a conversation for a different time. But yeah, that was what started my journey.
Wow. Well, that's an interesting journey. And you haven't mentioned your attitude towards religion, though.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I don't know how much Tercia, right? Tercia? Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, I almost said Teresa, and then I was like, wait, no, it's not Teresa, it's Tercia. So
my name is difficult because it's Afrikaans. So I'm from South Africa, and I'm actually Afrikaans speaking. So it's derived from tertiary, but in Afrikaans it's tertia. It's very. I think I should just my name.
No, I think it's a beautiful name. It's a beautiful name, Tertia. Okay, perfect. I'm a full believer that your name is your identity. So just let me know how to say it, and I have no issue saying it properly. So, Tertia.
That's fine. No, I'm not that stuck on my name as my identity. I want to ask you before we do you speak Farsi as well, or do you only speak English? Are you multilingual?
No, I'm multilingual. I lived in Iran for a year, so I'm multilingual.
So did you have to translate or interpret for your mother, or has she now learned English, or I should say American?
No, my mother knows English. I mean, she does have an accent, but she knows English. I think what the biggest struggle was kind of like working the system, right? So I had to find her lawyer. I had to kind of like say, Mom, you have to go on food stamps. Hey, Mom, you need to do this, that, and the third. You need to get a social worker. So I think it was more so like the system that she wasn't too aware of. But, overall, she does speak English. So.
Good. Yeah.
So sorry, I interrupted you, but I when I thought about our discussion tonight, I was so interested in your activism and your advocacy work that I didn't even think about asking whether you are religious or what your religious views are, because to me the advocacy work is so much more interesting and more important. But please, John asked about that, and I think it's important it would be interesting to hear what your views are.
Well, you've asked it, Tercy. It doesn't need me to repeat what you said. We want to hear.
No.
we want to hear what you've been doing in the politics field, particularly with regard to the situation in Iran.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was a two-tier question, which I can, kind of like tackle like one by one. Personally, when it comes to me and religion, I identify as Muslim, but I'm not a practicing Muslim. But I do identify as Muslim. I think if you follow my Twitter, there was a whole entire cancel campaign against me for like 2 weeks straight, because on David's podcast, actually, I said that a religion is not its government and the government is not its religion, right? Therefore, saying that the Islamic Republic and the Islamic regime is not a representation of Islam or Muslim people. And there was a whole entire cancel campaign against me. I went to Atlanta. These people were commenting on the nonprofits who I was like booked to speak for publicly. And they were like, oh, Ariana Jasmine is a fraud. It was a whole thing. But my approach when it comes to religion and a government is that I don't like it when it's conflated as the same thing, right? I don't think the Taliban represents the average American Muslim, and vice versa. I don't think the average American Muslim, for example, represents the Taliban. And so I do think that religion is a tool a lot of governments use to control women and to control and oppress women, but also to control masses. We're seeing parts of that in America. We've definitely seen it overtake countries like Afghanistan, but it's a common theme that has been a thing within the American, not the American, but just like, excuse America, I meant to say human. within the human society, right? When Christianity first came out, we saw how that, completely colonized countries of people in the name of, Christianity and Christ. And then we're seeing, Islam being used in really egregious ways. And so, that's just my opinion on it. I think that religion in general, when it's mixtured with government, it's just a bad mix that should never happen. Now, going beyond that, my personal advocacy with Iran, I used to have a rule where I was like, I don't speak about Iran because my whole entire family is there. Even my dad is there right now. Actually, my dad has been there for the past 8 months. So the whole entire time I've been advocating against Iran, my dad has actually been there. And so, it's one of those things where when the Zan Zindagi Azadi movement started, the Women Life Free movement started when Mahsa Jina Amini was murdered, right? I think we saw a lot of parallels with that in George Floyd. And I don't mean that it was the same exact thing, but it kind of sparked a parallel movement within Iran, right? Where it was the first women-led revolution in history in general. But also, it's the same example. It's the parallel example of police brutality. It's the parallel example of systems of oppression and how they play out when it comes to sovereignty of people and people living in the country, right? And so when I lived there in Iran, I was born and raised in America. I went there for a year when I was in 8th grade. My parents sold everything. We moved there for a year. And then trigger warning, I actually became suicidal at the last tale of us staying there. And so then my dad immediately brought me back and put me into therapy. So one of the reasons why we actually came back was because my mental health had deteriorated to such a bad place where my father was like, okay, I need to get her out of here. When I lived there, there was no sense of retaliation, right? I think it was something that people had just accepted. But that was also in 2009, right? We're talking about over 10 years ago.
As you said, it was Amina's outrage that sparked the reaction in the public, and it is similar to the George Floyd event, because that also touched the public heartstrings and started to protest too. So I can see your parallel there.
Yeah, I would say that I would say in both situations, though, it was kind of like bound to happen, right? Because it was multiple years that the Black community was saying Black Lives Matter. It was multiple years that they were protesting peacefully, right? They were kneeling, they were, doing marches. And then once George Floyd was so egregiously murdered, unjustifiably egregiously murdered, like everybody, any person with a decent mind could watch that video and say that is wrong, that is unjustified.
It's like an earthquake, isn't it? The tensions build up, and then
absolutely
eventually the public say we've had enough.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's exactly what happened in Iran. Like when my mother went to live there in 2018-19, she was like, Ari, everything has changed. Everything has changed. Like people are showing their hair a lot more under their scarves. If somebody gets arrested, everybody jumps in and tries to save them. Like it was just, I've never seen this before. It was so different. And I was just like, are you really? Because have you guys watched Hunger Games?
No.
I've seen it. Yeah, I have.
Okay.
I'm familiar with it. Yep.
Okay. In Hunger Games where the minute the people try to kind of like revolt, the guards are right there to like arrest them and shoot them. Like it's a state of policing that's just like very highly policed in order to keep the system at play and order. That's exactly what it's like in Iran. Every single street you walk in, there's police with rifles. You know what I mean? Like you just can't. It's kind of like Hunger Games. Like it's funny. I was actually watching Mockingjay Part 1 and Part 2. It was the last 2 films of Hunger Games the other day. Because sometimes when I work, I like to have something playing in the background so I could focus on my computer. And I was just like, damn, this is just like the Iranian government. Like there were just so many parallels. And I had watched it when I was in high school, right? Like I didn't really put 2 and 2 together. But now that I'm like, 27 and I'm watching it, I was like, oh my God, there's so many parallels. But either way.
Ariana, I'm sorry. Can I interrupt you? I want to ask you. So I'm a teacher and I work with teenagers. So I just want to, when you lived in Iran in 8th grade, what was it? Were you 13, 14? around thereabouts.
12 to 13.
12, yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing that has that if you don't mind, was it the suppressive nature of the society that got to you? Was that one of the why your mental health sort of deteriorated? Were there other things? You don't have to go into it, but I'm asking because I just listened to an interview by Margaret Atwood yesterday, where she spoke about repressive regimes and totalitarian societies, and she spoke about The Handmaid's Tale and her experience with people who lived behind the Iron Curtain in the 80s. And what you say now reminds me very much of that. And I don't think that there's not many people alive today who know what it's like to live in a repressive society, because I mean, South Africa even today is a very free society. We most people don't really have an idea what it's like to have policemen on the street, and it's not as if they make you feel safe. They're a threat to you because you might not be wearing the right, you might have too much makeup on, and they can arrest you for that, and it sounds like
you're coming from the perspective of a Western woman, aren't you? Because there are certainly countries where having police on every corner with guns is the norm. I suspect that in a lot of Russia right now, that's the situation, because you can't say anything that is against the government's policy.
Yeah, I mean, okay, well, what happened with my mental health, it was actually a lot of different things. So first of all, my parents went there to get a divorce, right? So that was already happening, which is already not a great scenario to begin with.
Never a good idea for children. No.
Yeah, it was already bad enough, but then they kind of like took us to Iran. Anyways, I grew up, so my parents wanted to teach me about Islam. When I was in kindergarten, they put me in a mosque, in a mosque kindergarten. It was a private mosque school. And 2 weeks after they put me there, 9/11 happened, and they immediately pulled me out, and they never talked about Islam again. Like, that was the beginning of the end of that whole entire conversation. So so when I went to Iran, I had no idea what Islam was, what it meant, what it looked like. I just had no clue. Like, my parents never taught me. They never even spoke about it. So, I went there, parents are getting a divorce, and then they kind of like, it's kind of you take a polar bear and then you put it in the Sahara Desert, right? Like, you raise this child that was arguably pretty free to wear what she wanted to wear. You rose a child that could say what she wanted to say. You rose a child that really rarely saw police, maybe sometimes on the street, if even that. And then you like plop this child into a country, complete dictatorship, police everywhere. Every single moment of your life, when you're walking out of the door, you are being constantly policed, from what you're wearing to how much makeup you're putting on to like who you're looking at. Like, you're not even like, for example, if my friends and I went to the park and like a group of guys came up and talked to us, and like the police decided to raid, we would have all been arrested just for simply talking to the boys that came up to us. Well, if we couldn't prove that they were our brother or that we were engaged to them, it was done. It was over with.
Well, of course, in Afghanistan, the Taliban recently introduced rules that said boys go to the park between 8 and 12 and girls go to the park between 12 and 6. It's ludicrous. But that didn't work. They kept spreading over the boundaries. So they have now completely forbidden females from going to the park.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the Taliban is kind of what Iran would be if Iran was on steroids, right? Women and men are still allowed to go to the park at the same time. Women are encouraged to go to university. Actually, Iran has some of the highest stats with women being highly educated. Actually, more women in Iran have higher education, like bachelor's, master's, doctorals, and PhDs than the men in the society. So, women are allowed to drive, right? So it's very odd because you look at somewhere like Saudi Arabia, 10 times worse than Iran,
Yeah.
arguably so. But
I
the
remember
public,
when
it's
I
just
remember when
interesting.
Saudi permitted women to drive. It was only a couple of years ago.
Oh
Saudi
yeah,
changed their law and said,
this
"Okay, you can drive now."
yeah, this story. You know what's funny? I've actually, well, it's not funny. I actually know a couple of people that are in the industry that they go to Saudi Arabia to do comedy shows or like, I have a lot of comedy friends and they're like pretty big and they do like Middle East tours and one of their stops is in Saudi. And they were like, "Oh, dude, Saudi, like you have no idea, it's so bad there." And I was like, "What do you mean? They just let the women drive?" And he was like, "Good luck finding a woman that drives." And this
Oh,
was like literally a year ago. Like,
mm,
so yeah, legally women are by definition, sure, but like in practice, does it happen a
yeah,
lot? I
yeah.
I wouldn't bet money on it.
Mm,
So I think my mental health it was a convolution of everything. I was confused. I didn't know what was going on half the time. That year that I was in Iran, I was forced to learn Arabic and read the Quran. So like I didn't know what I was doing half the time, but I was doing it, right? I was memorizing surahs and stuff like that.
mm,
There was a huge portion of my time there where I became incredibly rebellious. So
mm.
I wore these Vans, and you guys know the type of Vans, like they have a little sole, like a white part of the shoe. I wrote God Bless America on it.
Ah,
I went to
mm,
school, and so they
mm,
called my dad in. They were like, "Your daughter's really pushing it." And my
mm,
dad was like, "Give me like 3 days, let me talk to her." So there was another time where they have these like, the military, the IRGC military will send the guards will send their military band into the school, and
mm,
they basically bring everybody to the front of the school, and they're like, "All right, everybody, listen to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard play music that praises the Islamic Revolution,"
mm,
or whatever. And I remember everyone went, and I sat inside the class, and I was like, "I'm not going." And my principal was like, "You have to go." And I was like, "I'm not going. I don't care about them. I'm not going. God bless America." So that one got me suspended for a couple of days. I'm not gonna lie. At that point, they were really over me.
mm,
But it was I was not meshing well. I was not doing
mm,
well. I
mm,
rejected every single aspect of the society
mm.
wholeheartedly, and it just wasn't like the combination. It kind of built this like perfect storm for my mental health to completely plummet.
Are your parents who
Well,
are still in Iran, are they at risk at the moment, especially if you're here saying what you're saying?
Um, who knew Artie was such a patriot? You know what's funny? I was actually very patriotic for a couple of years when I came back to America. I was like, God bless America. No
Mm,
country can be as great as I was a straight Republican in high school. And then I actually started studying and I was like, wait, America sucks too. But anyways, that's beyond the point. That's beyond the point. Yeah, my I haven't spoken about my father at all when I speak. In general, the way the Islamic Republic works, well, I had to risk it to figure this out, but what I've seen is that as long as you keep excuse me, as long as you keep your family outside of your politics, they won't bother your family, right?
ah,
So
mm,
I don't
okay.
this is the first time I've actually conveyed that my dad is in Iran, and that's because he's
ah.
coming back in a couple of days. So it's like
Oh,
whatever,
I see. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Mm,
but it's one of those things where like I never implicated my father or my mother or my family in any of my work, and they understand that. You know what I mean?
mm,
I think they get that. Like, okay, well, she's
mm,
like running her mouth. It doesn't have anything to do with her family.
mm.
What I wouldn't put past them is them kind of keeping a microscope on my family to ensure that they're not
Yeah.
passing
Mm,
information to me or anything. But since
mm,
I knew they would probably do that, I was in no contact with them whatsoever, other than my father, maybe once every 2 weeks, just to ask him how
mm,
he's doing.
mm.
So, and I told him specific. It's so funny actually. One of my TikToks went viral, and my dad saw it because people were sending it in WhatsApp group texts in Iran.
Mm, mm,
And so my dad called me and he was like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I was like, "Sorry." I
mm,
was like, "I should have
mm.
probably told you. I don't want to freak you out." He was like, "Just keep me out of it. Just please keep me
Yeah.
out of it." I was like, "Okay, no problem. I'll keep you out of it."
Mm.
And yeah, we haven't had any issues.
Well,
Well, I'm very glad that you haven't had.
Sorry, go ahead, Tercy. I've had too much.
No,
You have a go.
no, I was going to say I'm very glad that you haven't had any issues, and if you don't want to answer, just indicate by saying no or whatever. But do you ever feel nervous that your phone calls might be bugged, that you might be followed around? Does the Iranian government have enough influence to actually threaten you, or at least have any impact on your life in the United States? And the other thing I wanted to ask is, do you have any contact with activists in Iran? And do you sort of have to play it safe? And because I mean that just, to me, it indicates the courage that one needs to stand up for one's convictions. Because I don't live in a repressive society, but even in a very open society like South Africa, there are certain things that in this, to say that openly that you're non-religious, for example, in my country, you won't be explicitly hounded, but there might be some implicit discrimination, and it might have a social impact. So it, but I mean, in places like Iran and in Russia, the courage that people need to display, to actually speak their minds, it just astonishes me whenever I come across people who are true activists. So
Yeah, of course. I think that's a great question. First of all, Iran does have that kind of pull, and they've tried that with multiple different Iranian activists. There's one activist, her name is Mahsi Alinejad. She's actually one of the biggest activists. Like, she's the type that will go to France and speak to Macron and, like, do European tours speaking to different prime ministers and stuff like that. So obviously she's much bigger and much higher profile than I am. But, the IRGC sent somebody with a shotgun to her doorstep, and the CIA actually had to intercept and pull her out. I believe it was like in the middle of the night, and send her to like an undisclosed place. So that's definitely happened, although she is much more higher profile than I am. So, I just do want to put that out there, that they don't do something as drastic to everybody, right? With that being said, though, I don't think I'm necessarily scared of the Iranian government, but I do have a set of people that do not like me at all, regardless of, I mean, I think it's like some really ultra-right Republicans that really don't like me, but then it's also a group of Iranians, a very small sector of Iranians that do not agree with my take when it comes to Islam. And they also started a whole entire hate campaign against me as well. And basically saying that I don't know, just saying some crazy things like, oh, I'm a part of the MEK, which is an Iranian, it's a terrorist group, but they're also working to revolt, to change the government, but they're really not good people, right? So we're kind of working towards the same goal, to like change the Iranian government, but they're kind of like crazy and terroristy. Well, they are terroristy. They're kind of like a cult. Kind of think of them like, they kind of operate like Mormon cults. And like, they're called MEK. Like, we don't like them. We don't identify with them. They're kind of crazy. They're actually based in Europe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And so, very fundamentalist. Yeah. We're working towards the same goal of getting rid of the Islamic regime, but they're crazy fundamentalists. Like, their founder forced hysterectomies on the women in the group, and like he would have sex with the women. It's just things that we don't like so at all.
Totally bizarre.
Yeah, very bizarre, culty thing. So just to answer your question though, yes, I do fear for my life, but not in the sense of like, is the Islamic regime going to come after me? I more so fear like, is somebody going to break into my house and attack me because of the work that I do? But that might just be because I'm paranoid. But that sometimes that thought does cross my mind.
But you've got, in America right now, you've got quite a large Iranian expat population that's protesting in support of the protesters in Iran itself. Periodically. Have you had anything to do with that, or are you aware that that's been happening?
Well, yeah. So the Iranian population in America, the whole entire population in America, less than 1% of it is Iranian. So Iranians don't even make up a percentage of the whole entire population in America. Now, from the small population of Iranians who do live in America, there are a lot of people who have been organizing protests across the nation every single week. We have an organization in the Bay Area, San Francisco, California, who have been protesting every single week. But then we also have a huge group in LA that also organizes protests like very regularly as well. So yeah, that does exist. I do go to some of them. For me, yeah, I've gotten death threats. Yeah, I've gotten a lot of death threats. So I've definitely been paranoid, especially recently. But yeah, those protests do exist. I do go to those protests. I have gone to those protests. For me, it's funny actually. I went to Los Angeles for the last really big one, and I was backstage, and I actually saw the Shah's son, like the prince, walk right in front of me before he went up to stage. It was insane. I never thought I would see that. It was crazy. But yeah, I mean, I do think within the Iran movement in America, there's a lot of division, right? You have a huge group of people who are monarchists. They want the monarchy to go back in.
Yeah.
And they're very like pro-monarch. They're like, it's either the monarch, which is the Shah's son, the prince going back in, or we don't want it. And then there's also a group of people who are like, well, we don't want the monarchy. The monarchy sucked. That's why people revolted against the monarchy. So there's a lot of clashes too. I've seen people clashing at protests where it was like a communist against a monarchist, and they were literally fighting about why their side was better. So it's complicated.
Yeah, the monarchy back in the days of the Shah, it was a curate's egg. Bits of it were good in that you could wear Western clothes. Women could wear what they wanted. There's photographs of them in bikinis enjoying themselves at the beach and so on, which hasn't happened since the mullahs took over back in, when was that, 79? And so in that respect, the monarchy was better than the current government, but also it was still in many respects rather how should I say, medieval and not the perfect solution. You wouldn't want it back now.
Yeah, I mean, listen, once again, I've gotten a lot of hate for this opinion as well, but I have a couple of opinions on it. Number one, I just think as a diaspora who's lived in America most of my life, I don't really have a say on who should be the ruler of Iran, because chances of me moving back there are very slim. I think it's a very privileged stance to say, oh, the people in Iran need this or that, because we don't live there, and where chances are we're probably not going to go back there anyways. But beyond that point as well, I think monarchies are completely outdated. I do think in the sense of like keeping the culture alive, monarchies are cool, right? Like, some places like Spain still have like a propped up monarchy that still exists, right? Like I think for culture and for ceremonies it's cool, but as far as having a monarchy go back and having a prince be the ruler of a country, I think that's weird. I just don't think that should be
here in the UK we have a toothless monarchy, which is fine.
Your monarchy is such a mess, man. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah.
I've just been watching a program about Prince Harry and all the ups and downs he's had with now King Charles, his father. Because first, periodically, they were good buddies, and then something happens and they fall out. Currently, they're really falling out. They don't get on at all right now.
Yeah.
Well, I can say that even in South Africa, we have several monarchs. We have the King of the Zulus, we have the King of the Vendas, and all they do is cost a hell of a lot of tax money to keep their household going. But for some reason, there's a lot of people who really like the idea of having a king, and that brings me to something that I want to just circle back to, the whole question of being regarding or seeing yourself as culturally, at least, part of Islam. And I've been looking at the board behind you, and I love the. I've been looking at all the slogans, and you know, I love that the scribe, is it a the well, it will be your left, just over your left shoulder. There's that beautiful picture of a young man drawing, and I wonder about the. So, can one be a cultural Muslim? In other words, so you're attached to, or you have a fondness for the culture and the richness of the history, but you don't believe in the religion part of it, because and that's an interesting it's an interesting view, because in my frame of reference, I don't think that it's very acceptable among Muslim believers that one is just a cultural Muslim. So I'm asking because I don't know. I know that Jewish, being a cultural Jew, is that's almost the norm. But I'm not familiar with being a cultural Muslim. Although I think it's brilliant. I think there should be more people who are cultural Christians and say that I'm a cultural Christian. And then I suppose I could be regarded as a cultural Christian, because that's how I grew up, and that's my it's part of my culture, and it's part of who I am, and it's shaped who I am and how I was raised and how I've lived a great deal of my life. So I'd like you to talk a bit about that. I find it extremely interesting. Celebrating, for example, Ramadan. I know Ramadan started.
It started a couple days ago.
Yeah. My brother is actually a teacher in Abu Dhabi.
Oh,
cool. Yes. So I'm very I'm quite in touch with the rituals and the culture, and it's fascinating to me. So I'd like you to speak to that for a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Paulo, California loves you too. And Sal, yes, you are right. Cenk Uygur is also a great example of being culturally Muslim. If you guys don't know who he is, he's actually the owner and the host of. You probably know who he is. Everyone knows who he is.
Young Turks.
But the
that's
Young Turks. Yeah. So, I think being culturally Muslim is kind of a newer concept.
Yeah.
But and I don't speak for every single Iranian, right? There's obviously Iranians who are Baha'i, who are Jewish, who are Christian. They just do not believe in a religion. There's agnostic Iranians. So I don't want to lump Iranians into this huge group, because it wouldn't be true. It wouldn't be fundamentally true. But with that being said, I think there is a good portion of Iranians who are culturally Muslim, in the sense where they don't pray 5 times a day. They don't, they don't wear a headscarf. They're very liberal in the way that they think, right? Like their child is gay and they're fully accepting of it. Or, their daughter has a boyfriend, and like the boyfriend comes over for Christmas, right? So I do think there's a lot of Iranians who are culturally Muslim, in the sense where they do pray to Allah, they do believe in the faith of Islam, but they don't necessarily practice it. It's more so ingrained in their culture, right? In the way where, and when I say it's ingrained in their culture, for example, when somebody goes on a long trip, right, you just kind of bring out the Quran and you like put it over their head 3 times and you're like, okay, safe travels, right? That doesn't, my family is not actively Muslim. They don't actively, practice Islam, but that cultural thing that you do whenever someone goes on a long trip is something that they've just adopted, right? Because their family, their grandmothers and their grandmothers and their grandmothers did it, right? Or for example, another great example of it is whenever somebody gets engaged, you always see a Quran on the table. If a family is culturally Muslim, right? They probably don't actively read the Quran. They probably don't even pray. But that Quran is still on the table because it's something that you've grown up with, right? And so I do think, obviously, for Iranians, we're originally Zoroastrian. We weren't even Muslim. And then the Arabs they tried to conquer us. They did colonize us for a bit. And then the Arab colonization of Iran, they tried to change our language. They weren't able to change our language. They tried to change our customs. They weren't able to change our customs, but they were able to change our religion. And so they kind of forced us to go from Zoroastrian through colonization to Islam. And so it's been this way for thousands of years. And it's just, I think Islam is ingrained in the Iranian culture, and like I said, a lot of Iranians would not like me saying this, but I think it's just the truth, right? I mean, even in America, most of my mom's friends they're culturally Muslim, right? And so they don't actively practice Islam, but like, yeah, when their daughter got married, they had a Quran on the table. They read surahs of the Quran. They don't actively practice, but they still did that because it's culturally ingrained.
Yeah,
I
sure.
do think that's definitely a thing within Iranians and Turkish people as well, right? Because Iranian people and Turkish people tend to be a bit more liberal and a bit more culturally Muslim than a country, for example, like Afghanistan.
Yeah, there was trade going on with the West and the Christians. Yeah, but what worries me, it's fine. I think being a moderate or being just a cultural member of your faith it's a journey in the right direction. We're going away from fundamentalism. But what worries me is while you're still considering yourself to be a member of the tribe, whoever, I'm not talking specifically about you, but while these cultural faith people are still ticking that box on the census forms, they are tacitly substantiating, justifying, supporting, sponsoring the fundamental end, because they can say, look, there's this fantastically large number of us, and all the cultural ones get lumped into that number.
Yeah, definitely, and that's why I made that disclaimer, right? I was like, listen, not all Persians are Muslim, and that's okay, right? But for those of us, for the large portion of us that are Muslim, we do things that are culturally that we've just grown up with, and it's considered to be Islam, but do we actively practice Islam? No. Like for example, I've never seen my mom fast. Like my mom has never fasted, but every single day she'll like say like Alhamdulillah, right? Like she'll say like thank God for like that I'm alive, that I'm, it's cultural because like if you actually look at her, does she practice? No, but it's more so like culturally ingrained in her.
That all of our languages have been polluted with faith-based references.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody sneezes in this country, 10 to 1, somebody else will say, bless you.
Yeah.
Bless you.
Yeah.
That's right. Something that I want to ask you as well is, have you, what I found, so I used to be a fundamentalist Christian, and then I deconverted in my 40s. And I have found that when you leave a group, that you get the most criticism from your former group. And I'm interested to know whether you have ever found that as a basically non-practicing Muslim, that you get more criticism from devout Muslims. Have you ever, or is it just maybe you don't move in those circles, so it's not a thing? Or do you know of other people perhaps? Because it's always been my hypothesis that people who are less devout get more criticism from the in-group or the former in-group than people who were originally not part of the in-group.
I think that's a great question. I have yet to meet a Iranian who's actually devout Muslim.
Oh,
that's interesting.
Yeah,
I've in very tolerant circles. Well done.
Yeah, I've never met an Iranian who's actually devout. Now, when I lived in Iran, I had one aunt that was kind of crazy about it, and no one really got along with her. But outside of her, I've never really. I mean, I know those fundamentalists exist in the systems of Iran because obviously they were the ones that were, playing a part in the society that they had created, right? For example, IRGC guards, the schools, the teachers, stuff like that. But, when it comes to Iranian Americans, I've never met a Muslim devout. They've all just been culturally Muslim.
Yeah.
And so that criticism does not really exist in Iranian American circles at all because we all kind of grew up secular because of a part of it is also 9/11 too. We all just got really scared. It was like a collective, like, damn, we're in survival. Like there's people literally getting murdered for being Muslim. So I think 9/11 had a huge part to play in it too, where even the families that did come here and at least try to be a little bit active within the Muslim community were immediately like scared and just like opted out, like my family.
Yeah. They didn't want the finger pointed at them, did they? After the atrocious act.
No, I mean, I remember my dad was like, we have to pull her out tomorrow. Like my dad was like, my dad was like, this is about to be really bad. And they did. And then my parents sat me down. I don't know, I was like 5 at the time, and they were like, if anyone asks you, tell them that, like, don't tell them that you're Muslim. Just don't bring that up. Don't talk about it. And I was like, okay. I didn't know what was going on. I was just like, okay. Yeah. And so so I don't. Now, with that being said, though, there's a lot of Middle Eastern communities who are not Iranian, who are very active in the Muslim community, and what you just explained does exist in those groups.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But within the Iranian community, I have yet to see it.
Yeah. Well, having had the Shah all those years, you had a taste of not being very Muslim.
Oh yeah.
So probably the whole country of Iran is a lot more tolerant than some of the other more stringently Muslim.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I go into family things, like family friend things. We call them family because that's the only people we have. The only family I have in America is my mom and my brother, but we do have a lot of family friends who are also Iranian, kind of in the same boat.
Yeah.
I go to their parties with over 200 plus people there. There's at least 5 families who have like gay children who bring their same sex partners, and everyone's just like, it's a big happy party. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where I think people had this like perception of Iranians that were very fundamentalist and we're religious. We're not. Actually, it's funny you say that because the revolution was so close in time. My father served in the Shah's military.
Did he?
Yeah. Like that's how close it was. You know what I mean? Like it was just a couple decades ago where my father was serving in the Shah. Well, I mean, my dad's pretty old, but beyond the point, like, he was still he's kind of a geezer. Love him, but definition of old. Okay, my dad's like 76, so I guess in America he's old. Yeah, he's old. Okay, thank you.
No, that's old.
Yeah.
We're not going to tell him that you said he's old. Don't worry.
Oh my God. It's okay. He's kind of like a cat. He has 9 lives. It's like, people were like, are you not worried about your dad in Iran and you're speaking about the government? I'm like, dude, you don't know my dad. Like, that man has legally died twice and came back to life. Like, he will survive. He'll be okay. Yeah.
Is there any tendency amongst Iranians? By the way, which is a preferred pronunciation? Iranians or Iranians? Does it matter?
It's Iran. If you want to be like grammatically correct,
Yeah. Okay. But I wondered if is there any tendency to prefer the description Persian to Iranian?
Yeah, I will. I'm gonna answer you, and then let me get Tertia's question as well, and then I'm gonna answer both of you.
Okay.
Yeah, go with John first. I'll come in after.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's kind of funny you asked that question because I think growing up, no one wanted anything to do with the word Iran. There's just so much like bad connotation around it, right? Yeah. It's like the first thing you think of Iran is like terrorists and nuclear bombs, especially around Obama's time. So, I grew up, like a lot of us grew up and we would all just say Persian because it was it was a cast of just like shame, right? It was like, ew, we're Iranian. But I think once I graduated high school and I kind of started accepting the fact that, like, okay, I'm Iranian, I think for me, I've always said Iran. I've always said I'm Iranian. Like before the Women Life Freedom Movement, after the Women Life Freedom Movement, I've always said I'm Iranian because I was just like, there's nothing to be ashamed of, right?
Yeah.
I think after the Women Life Freedom Movement and after the perceptions of Iranians has changed in the general public eye, a lot more people are using Iran now. Because people kind of understand that it's the government that's crazy, not us, right? But there's a lot of Persian people who, that's very true, Sal. Sal got a point too. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, like, I know a lot of people, like a lot of the circles I would go to, they would say like, oh, I'm Persian like the cat. just to like kind of soften the blow of like being
Yes, yes.
Iranian. And so it was, I've always said Iran just because I don't think there's anything wrong with being Iranian, but yeah.
You need to have grey hair to be like all over, to be like the cat.
Oh, that's true. That's very true. And a squished face.
Yes.
Tertia, what was your question?
Well, actually, I was going to make a statement more than a question. The one thing that I've taken away from this conversation is that I know so little, and I think most people know even less than I do, because I see myself as a student of history, and I try to educate myself as far as different cultures are concerned, and I just once again have learned how we put people in boxes and how we tend to not understand all the subtleties. Because when I hear Iran, I almost see this picture of the Taliban and Afghanistan. And yes, I know it's not the same. I know it's not the same place. I know that. But it's almost as if we lump things in the same box,
Yeah.
And it struck me how little we know about the world we live in, and how nuanced everything is. Because I mean, Iran is in the Middle East, and we have preconceived ideas of what people from the Middle East are like, and we should always be aware that it's always more nuanced than we know, and than we believe to know. And I think there's a massive shortcoming in the global education system, in that we don't get a classical education where we get a broad overview of the history of the whole world, and we know the children and adults know way too little about the broad history of the world, and that the pictures that we have are often only based on what's happened in the past 10 or 20 years, and that's very limited. So I just want to say that thank you. For me, this was such an insight, and to make this connection again in my mind between Persia and the rich history and the variety and the different ways of living and being in the world. And so I'm keeping an eye on the time. So I just want to say that, and thank you so much.
Of course.
It was so interesting.
In the last few minutes, how do you see the developments in Iran proceeding? What's your hope for the next year or two?
Yeah, I mean, my hope and what I think is going to happen is two different things. I think there's a couple of things that being considerate of the time, I just want to say a couple of things. Tercia, to your point, Iran is a beautiful country. There's beautiful landscape. A lot of the areas in Iran is metropolitan, just like New York, right? But there's also this heavy policing and this perception that the media has kind of like thrown at us over and over again for 2 decades, especially with the war on terror with Iraq and the 9/11 and everything. So that's a whole different podcast, episode. But with that being said, my hope with Iran is that we have to have a couple of considerations, right? Iran's GDP is they have a lot of money, the government, as much as they don't spend it on the people are very poor. There's a lot of inflation, but the government is very rich. They have a lot of oil, and they're the second largest natural gas producer in the world as well. And so, when we're talking about a revolution, we have to put into consideration that we're talking about going against a largely armed government with people who are unarmed, people who are poor, people who are hungry, right? With a large wage gap as well. And so my hope in the next 2 years is that, Iranian women are free to wear what they want. They can afford to put food on the table. There's no heavy sanction. The Iranian money isn't worth, less than a cent of American money, because right now the Tuman is the lowest valued money in the world. That just happened a week ago. And so when we talk about what I want for the Iranian people is not just a free Iran, but an Iran that you can actually live in comfortably, right? The people have jobs, you have the highest education population of younger people, and none of them can get jobs because of high inflation and sanction rates. And so, I would love to see a free Iran in the near future, but fundamentally seeing that happen might take a while, and that's okay, right? Revolutions don't happen overnight. It's just important to continue to talk about it and continue to support the people fighting for their freedom.
Well, that's fantastic. I hope that progress does go in the right direction. It would be nice to be able to visit it again, like a tourist country once more. And feel safe.
Yeah, me and you both. I can't go back either. So,
Well, thank you
one
very
day
much.
maybe we'll all go together. Of course. Thank you for having me. I appreciate
You've
it.
been fantastic. And I just want to flag up that next week we've got a professor of biology named Nathan Lentz, and his research specialism is in human genome evolution. That should be interesting.
I've heard
Are we going
babies
to
don't have wisdom teeth anymore, so you guys should ask about that. Sorry, Tercia, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
You should ask about that. It's cool.
Yeah, our jaws shrunk. So
yeah,
those who do get wisdom teeth, it's a problem for the dentist. Yeah. So watch us again next week. And thank you for watching tonight. Well, tonight here where I am. I know it's not where you are. And thank you for your comments. We love a bit of engagement from the audience. And once more, thank you for coming, Ariana.
Of course. Violet, Paulo, Farah, Sal, thank you so much for being in the chat. I appreciate you guys. Paulo, I love you. I love you guys so much. Thanks for coming. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was an absolute pleasure. I'm sorry, Tercia. I've been a pain to work with, but this week was just really chaotic.
Not at all.
This week has been so chaotic, so I apologize. But thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And guys, make sure you subscribe to their channel, please. Anybody from my chat that's in here, subscribe to them.
Yes, please. We've got lots of interesting videos to watch.
Yeah.
And we absolutely support the work that you do in more ways than you can probably imagine. So we mention your actions and your activism. And if I were younger and I lived where you live, then and I didn't have children, I would have done exactly the same. But I know the courage it takes. And take heart whenever you feel threatened and you're not paranoid. Watch yourself, take care of yourself, and all the best to your mom and your dad and your family. And
thank you.
Let's see if we can change the world. Thank you for the work 100%. You do. Bye, John.
Yeah.
Of course. Thank you so much. I'll tell my people to follow you too in the Discord. So don't worry. I got you guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You guys have a wonderful day. And Tercia, we'll stay in contact. And John, I'll get your social media from Tercia, and we'll stay in contact. But have a great night, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bye.
Bye, everyone.